Ah, Valentine's Day, that day of the year where everyone goes out on dates with their better halves, while I sit around and live vicariously through my increasingly large pile of fictional romances. I've had this video idea in my back pocket for a long time. I did a top 5 unconfirmed list a few years ago, and I've been itching to do a confirmed counterpart, so I picked my top 20 anime romances. Even though I'm not confident that I have a solid list, it is a list that best reflects my experience with anime. I'll be ranking these based on my own personal enjoyment and how much I love the way these characters love each other. So naturally, the only things that I've seen. There's plenty that I haven't seen, several where I've only seen the anime, or only a handful where I've seen the entire story. But that also means that there's several that I haven't seen recently, and so that may affect the ranking and will definitely affect how much I can say about it. Per usual, only one romance per franchise, which means there has to be confirmed mutual affection for me to even consider it. Now, without further ado, let's get it started in here.
Why is it anytime you get flustered now, I feel it twice as much?
Guess I didn't realize.
Kicking off my list is probably the most grounded and realistic portrayal of a high school romance ever animated. Miyamura and Hori are just really nice and really hot for each other, and check all the relationship boxes without falling into a whole lot of cliches or things I would consider deal breakers. So why is it at the bottom of this list? Well, notice that I used the words realistic and high school in the same sentence. Nukumizu from Maki-ine said it best.
They say 7 out of 10 high school relationships fall apart within a year.
Yeah, I've seen plenty of relationships follow this exact same trajectory, and none of them were able to stick together once the novelty wore off and they had to balance work with their lives. I also just don't really like Miyamura. He's one of those male protagonists who sounds like he was written within earshot of the Human Resources Office. He's just so nice all the time, but then is all like, woe is me and my lonely life. Even though he has tons of girls swooning over him, you might even call him a nice guy in the derogatory sense. It's one of my least favorite aspects of the emo boy trope. I do want to give it credit for doing tons of little things well. Its influence on the genre has been an overall positive one. The best thing, aside from the aforementioned realism, is how fast things progress. Confession in episode 4, dating in episode 5, heavily implied intercourse in episode 7. Yep, that's how teenagers actually do it.
I'm your pawn after all. It's my job, right?
Jeez, I am not looking forward to having to edit this section. It's going to be so hard to find clips where her titties aren't just flopping around. These two are a perfect example of how a harem, especially an ecchi harem, can squander an otherwise solid relationship. Issei and Rias do a good job at matching each other's freak. He's a pervert who wants to be the harem king, yet she's the exhibitionist who comes onto him first. Their mutual skeeviness makes for a solid foundation for a comedic dynamic, especially with Rias being the switch princess who can be a domineering girl boss or a quiet submissive lady depending on her mood. It's just too bad that all the other girls have to constantly cock-block them. There used to be an unwritten rule that these types of shows can't let the characters have actual sex, which does in fact hinder the dynamics. It's an outdated stipulation on the genre, and one that I'm glad isn't as prevalent anymore. It still worked when there were only 2 seasons and 3 potential love interests, but as the show dragged on, they added in more girls and further reduced Rias to a side character in her own story. This is doubly disappointing because, by the logic of the show's premise, this should be Rias's harem, not Issei's. She's the boss, the club president, the demon princess who everyone forms a contract with, yet Issei ends up being the one everyone chases. The only reason this still made the list is because Issei does at least respect Rias more than anyone else. In fact, his respect gets in the way of their relationship at one point. I can't deny High School DxD's influence. Lord knows between Date Alive, Trinity 7, So I Can't Play H, and Testament of Sister New Devil, there's been more than enough ripoffs. All of them falling into the same traps without the strong starting point that made DxD stand above its future imitators.
I would have fallen in love with the same person 5 different times.
Power scaling romance is a silly concept, but I feel like it's necessary here. Ichigo Kurosaki and Orihime Inoue are, on paper, just a typical shonen romance. She's super in love with him, he's oblivious for most of the series, the little bits of affection he does give are no different from the way he'd treat any of his friends. That personality is what made her fall in love in the first place. We get barely anything in regards to their actual relationship, and then in a post-final battle time skip, it's revealed that they got married and had a kid. By all rights, this should not have made the list. But then I remembered that Tsukishima's ability is so broken it can work on inanimate objects and undo damage caused by Soul King Ascended Yuhabaha, yet this same reality rewriting ability needed several days to eat away at Orihime's memories and even then could do nothing to make her stop loving Ichigo. This girl's love is so powerful it can outright reject divine intervention. And with the benefit of hindsight and an incredible adaptation, there's quite a bit of evidence that Ichigo always held strong feelings for Orihime. She's not a fighter. Her power is to block, reject, and repair. She doesn't have Sakura's monstrous strength or Chopper's versatility, but even in the face of overwhelming apocalyptic power, Orihime stands firm. She sticks to Ichigo's side and does everything she can to keep him in the fight long enough for him to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. And there's something warm and idealistic about that.
I couldn't stand it. All that matters to me is that you understand.
Dandadan needed 2 cores. The ending to season 1 was pretty much the worst possible place to put a pause. Anyway, Okarun and Momo's relationship is one of the purest in the genre. When writing a compelling romance, you really have to flesh out why the 2 characters like each other. That's a no-brainer. The harder part is giving a compelling reason why they don't end up with literally anyone else. Dandadan's story puts that in focus. We already have Aira and Gigi serving as distractions for Okarun and Momo respectively, and this apparently continues to expand in the manga. Hopefully it doesn't become overbearing, otherwise I might end up dropping the show. I mean, Gigi is already pushing it. Yeah, I'm firmly on the side of finding Gigi to be the most obnoxious aspect of the series. But back to the couple I actually put on the list. Okarun is a nerdy shut-in kid. He's not bad looking, but he's into things that no sane girl would be into. He believes things no sane person would believe. He has no tact, barely has manners, and it's honestly no wonder he has so few friends. But Momo understood him when nobody else did. She comes from a family of psychics. She knows what it's like to have people laugh at your interest and make fun of the things you love. That's why she's initially kind to Okarun, becomes his first friend, and then helps him get his balls back. As far as I know, the one downside to this relationship is that Momo's feelings are built on flimsier logic. She wants her very own Ken Takakura, and that just happens to be Okarun's real name. But oh well, teenagers are nothing if not stupid, emotionally impulsive creatures. Reverse harems are fun because despite being rare in fiction, in my experience, it's far more common for guys to like the same girl while still remaining friends. Ouran High School Host Club is one of my favorite shows of all time, but it was difficult to actually pick something from it. That's the ever-present downside to all harem-type shows. No matter how many excellent love interests you throw at the screen, it will always be better to spend that time dedicated to just one relationship. Tamaki wins out by simple virtue of having the most time dedicated to his arc and his growing affection towards Haruhi. I also think the two balance each other out more than the other potential pairs. Tamaki is a wannabe prince who is loud and boisterous and in touch with his emotional side. Haruhi is a no-nonsense tomboy who is introverted without feeling the need to wallow in self-pity. Tamaki is the only one who can make her lighten up, which is a trend in this list. Meanwhile, Haruhi is the only one who can check his ego and discipline him, which is also a trend in this list.
I promise I'm going to find you again, no matter what, and fall in love with you again.
Kirigaya, Kirito Kazuto, and Asuna Yuki. Sorry, I just threw up in my mouth a little bit. Yeah, Sword Art Online is garbage. I haven't bothered watching anything since the first movie. The relationship between Kirito and Asuna is the only reason I stuck with it as long as I did, and I'm always happy to hear that they are still in a solid relationship as far as I know. Kirito has more pussy fired at him than a rock star, so the fact that he never really entertains them and is fully loyal to Asuna is at least worthy of my respect. Mushoku Tensei isn't ever going to be in my good graces precisely because of how it doesn't do this. I have no respect for Rudius or any male character who can't show at least a little bit of loyalty to his loved ones. The only one who gets a free pass is the 100 girlfriends guy, and only because making all 100 would-be soulmates happy is a life and death situation for him. Kirito might have the charisma of a slab of tofu, but at least he checks enough boxes to make me buy the fact that any of these women like him. Asuna makes up for his personality deficiencies because she is just a beaming ball of personality. The real heart of that first arc that made me not even mind so much when the second arc turned her into a damsel in distress, and then most of season 2 sidelined her, but that's okay, because she was the main character of the Mother Rosario arc, which is also the best thing to come from this franchise. Am I gonna get crucified for having it this slow? If not, then I certainly am when y'all see what I have above it. Kaguya-sama Love is War is a big gimmick series that did thankfully outgrow its gimmick, but 3 seasons was way too long to get there. Compare that to Horimiya, which has the 2 leads dating in episode 5 and banging in episode 7. Shirogane and Kaguya do get there eventually though. In fact, this would be pretty close to the bottom of the list if I wasn't somewhat aware of how the back half of the manga plays out. The dynamic here is a solid premise for a comedy. It's 2 tsuneres head over heels for each other, fully confident that they are aware of the other's feelings and coming up with increasingly elaborate mind games to get the other to confess first. That provides 2 reasons for why this is so low. Their energy is just too similar, and I'm firmly in the get the fuck over yourself and kiss already camp. By the midpoint of season 3, the whole thing was grating on me, and I started to question why I liked this series and this dynamic in the first place. Revisiting a few clips in preparation for this video did remind me that this is just a fun series. These 2 characters revel in each other's schemes. This is their relationship dynamic. I haven't read the manga, but I wouldn't be surprised if they keep up the shenanigans post-confession just for shits and giggles. Bonding over mutual interest is a tale as old as time. The most unique thing about My Dress Up Darling is how its 2 leads bond over complementary interests. Even better, those interests have left them estranged from their usual social circles. Wakana Gojo is mostly a normal guy. He's socially awkward, but that's due to a lack of practice more than anything, and plus Marin is just way too much for any sane person, really. Wakana is the kind of guy who could make friends fairly easily if he just tried or had any incentive to. The reason he lacks the incentive is because his one true love is a hobby mostly associated with little girls. Marin Kinagawa is in a similar boat. She's personable and super extroverted, but she's also a degenerate weeb who loves smut games and wants to cosplay. Again, just way too much. While cosplaying is a popular hobby, the content of those cosplays is geared towards men. It's a really strong foundation for a friendship and professional relationship if nothing else. Probably the strongest on this list. That's kinda the reason this is as low as it is. I know a few spoilers from the manga, but I've never read it. I can only judge it based on the anime. They're cute and totally hot for each other and love each other's passion, but the anime doesn't go beyond the surface of that premise. It's just all bubbly positivity and flustered horniness. Not a whole lot of anxious meat for me to dig into. Maybe there will be higher emotions if it ever gets a season 2. Here's hoping.
I can't hear you!
I'm telling you that I love it!
A first love can be a powerful yet fleeting thing. Years after you do drift apart, you might still occasionally stir awake at night and contemplate what could have been. How different would things be? How different would you be if that person didn't reach their hand out and show you how incredible love can be? Eureka 7 has 3 romances that showcase different sides of this equation. Renton and Eureka have a very cute adolescent romance that we know works out for them in the end. Sadly, that relationship is marred by the fact neither of them show up in the shitty sequel series, which is probably for the best because Astral Ocean ended up not being good. Holland and Talho have a more laid-back and mature relationship. Thanks to that, they slot in nicely as surrogate parents for our 2 leads. I, however, chose the dark horse for this list. Dominic Sorel and Anemone have a bitterly toxic relationship at first. She's a genetically engineered child soldier groomed into having an inferiority complex that's given her a fragile mental state. Dominic is the intelligence officer put in charge of caring for her. He becomes the hero who holds out his hand and tries saving Anemone from her suicide mission. Anemone doesn't contribute as many niceties, which is why I have this so low, but in her defense, she had a lot going on. A lot of trauma and pent-up aggression to work through, and not a lot of time to work through it. This has the shortest amount of screen time out of anything on this list. This scene alone blasted this relationship onto the list. You don't need years of development to solidify a romance when you get a scene that's this good.
I'll give half of my life to you if you give half of yours to me!
The main romance of my favorite show, the relationship between Edward Elric and Winry Rockbell, is more understated than most. They care deeply for each other, they grew up together. The Rockbells are the closest thing to a family the Elric brothers still have. Edward is brash and constantly getting his arm messed up, which is how the plot is able to keep Winry involved. If Winry was only ever someone for the boys to return home to, this romance wouldn't be anything to write home about. But she's the emotional core of a large chunk of the story, a constant reminder of the price of war and hatred. She is both Edward's greatest weakness and the source of his strength. The banter and frequent affection would be enough for me to consider it for the list, but what pulls it this high up is the very last episode of the series. Here we get a thesis statement for their entire relationship that links their feelings to the thematic core of the entire series. That's what love is all about, baby. And these two were able to articulate that point without any pointless romantic drama.
Well, I guess so.
Please just let me stay with you.
One major benefit that all fantasy and sci-fi stories have in building relationships is shared experience. In these sorts of settings, the leads tend to go through so much together that it doesn't really make sense for them to end up with some normal person. Inuyasha and Kagome lean into this pretty hard. By the end of the series, Inuyasha is pretty much the only one who can relate to Kagome's life experience, and Kagome is the only one who can put up with Inuyasha's bullshit. It's here that I'd like to point out that Inuyasha was in fact written by a woman, and may well be the best example of the female gaze in anime and manga. See, to the layman, female gaze and male gaze might seem like similar concepts, merely swapped along gender lines, but they actually have far more differences. The male gaze appeals to the basal monkey brain instincts, big titties, fat ass, a face that can launch 1,000 ships, and a personality that makes us not want to commit acts of violence.
And straight dudes are surprised when they find a girl who can make them feel genuine feelings in their heart.
The female gaze is a bit more esoteric. You can't just take a dude's shirt off and expect it to get the ladies all hot and bothered. No, their equivalent to the male gaze is based in more nuanced emotions, like knowing that this bad boy only shows a sensitive side to you, or knowing that they'll fight for you when the need arises, or knowing that you can fix them, or knowing that they'll be able to physically and financially support you. Women put a lot more value on things like loyalty and relational security, like a dog, so apt that Inuyasha's a half-dog demon who Kagome can compel by uttering the phrase "sit boy." It's all right there, it's not even subtext at that point. Naruto was first for me in a lot of ways. It was the first series I watched after getting exposed to the internet. It was the first anime I got into after hitting puberty. And so it happens to be the first show where I became involved in the fandom, looking at fan art and reading fan fiction. It's also my first time being in a shipping war. Pretty much every romance I had seen before had one real romance for the lead and the occasional agitator for cheap drama. Naruhina vs. Narusaku vs. Narusasu was vicious. It didn't help that Kishimoto wasn't confident in his abilities to flesh out any romances. So what we got, at least for a long time, was a pretty standard shonen ship. Hinata Hyuga loved Naruto when nobody else would. Naruto Uzumaki believed in Hinata when nobody else would. They stood together against impossible odds, faced down gods and monsters in the end of all things. And in the last movie, we see these feelings finally blossom into a romance where they can stand as partners who love and trust each other and bring out the best in each other. All that is still pretty surface level, no different from Ichigo and Orihime. The real reason this is so high on the list is because Boruto is actually kinda good. Only kinda. The Uzumaki family hijinks is some of my favorite material in the show. The episode where Hinata gets pissed and throws the boys out of the house because they're being obnoxious about Himawari's sickness is my favorite singular episode of Boruto, and possibly the entire franchise. You gotta have sugar and spice to crack the top 10. You'll notice Dragon Ball isn't anywhere on this list because neither of its 3 major romances feel fleshed out. They're all just there for plot and to facilitate the next generation. Naruto and Hinata could have fallen into the same trap, but I really enjoy how they stay relevant without stealing the spotlight. I mentioned earlier some of the issues with multiple love interests. One issue I haven't addressed until now is that so often the winner is simply the one with the most story potential, although I kind of did allude to that with Ouran High School Host Club. Nisekoi is a very influential rom-com. The ending to its manga left a bitter taste in a lot of people's mouths for reasons I don't have time to get into here. But at the end of the day, Raku Ichijo and Shitoge Kirasaki falling in love is more of a story than Raku Ichijo and Kosaki Onodera getting over themselves. Nisekoi's problem is that it dilly-dallied for too long, and added in too many superfluous love interests to try and distract from the fact that it was only ever going to be a 2-person race. Ichijo and Onodera always liked each other, but both of them were too spineless to admit it until long after it was too late. You can even make the argument that their love was too flimsy and that at least Onodera only decided to act on her feelings because she felt threatened by Kirasaki and the others. Kirasaki, on the other hand, tried her best not to fall in love, so it was compelling to watch her slowly get over herself, embrace her feelings, and become someone that Ichijo could fall in love with. So I was firmly on her side during this series run. Tsunderes are a popular trope for a reason, but what makes them so endearing is knowing that they might not be a tsundere forever. It's a great starting point for a complex character arc, and Shitoge Kirasaki is one of the best examples of this. It's especially cheeky how their conflicting personalities make them sound like an old married couple pretty early on in the series. It's just a shame that the ending dropped the ball in more ways than one. Even so, I think Nisekoi deserves to come back. So many of the best rom-coms from the past 10 years have taken their cues from Nisekoi and improved on the things Nisekoi messed up. The Nisekoi anime ending where it did just feels wrong. It needs to have an anime conclusion. What I'm saying is that we should give it the 1,000-year Blood War treatment.
Any of that didn't matter because the only thing I wanted was to be by your side.
Another one of my favorite rom-coms. This would be a contender for the top spot if the series bothered showing them in a relationship. Oh well, Toradora is the story of how Ryuji Takasu and Taiga Aisaka fell in love. I can't in good conscience knock it for ending where it wanted to end, especially when the journey there was so much fun. These two teens are a bit of a mess, more so Taiga than Ryuji. Ryuji just has a scary face. That face and the large body it's attached to has intimidated most of his peers into keeping their distance. It doesn't matter that he's also a neat freak with a big heart. He needs that big heart because Taiga is a feral, wild, passionate gremlin with a violent streak that scares most of her classmates, even though she's like 4'8" and 75 pounds. I can't say it's the healthiest relationship ever. Taiga becomes codependent on Ryuji in the back half of the series. She's got a lot of family baggage to work through and does so off-screen, I guess. So maybe she's less of a mess by the end of the series. I can only make educated assumptions though. Whatever the case, it takes a strong and patient man to put up with a slob like this, and Ryuji is more than up to the task. And Taiga is pretty much the only person who has never intimidated by him. She may not be the only one to appreciate his soft side, but she's the one most capable of bringing it out. Again, ranking Toradora's romance requires a lot of speculation. Teenage romances might make up the vast majority of this list, but that's simply because adult romances are so much rarer in anime. But that's a good segue into my next entry. One major element that's been pervasive in sitcoms since the 1960s is this overwhelming cynicism that marriage is the leading cause of divorce, that the wedding itself is an end to happiness. This feeling runs even deeper in teenage romances because, in reality, so few work out. Makiine isn't anywhere on this list despite being a top 5 all-time rom-com. The reason it's rated so highly is the same reason it's not on this list. When it comes to romance, teenagers are stupid and have no idea what they're doing, which is why it's so refreshing to see an awkward anime romance featuring two honest-to-God adults who are aware of how stressful a relationship can be, but still decide to take that chance anyway. Takuya Ohara is a quiet man who always half-assed his way through life because he's indecisive. Rika Honjoji is an antisocial woman ashamed of her interests who puts up a cold front so nobody gets close to her. Both have their hangups but put them aside to execute a scheme so that they can get out of being transferred to Alaska. But naturally, and pretending to be in love, they end up falling in love for real. I love how this series looks at marriage through a more mature lens. It acknowledges the frustrations and fears of romances. It acknowledges the potential for divorce, single parenthood, mistakes, and consequences. But the bliss of love triumphs all of it. Those risks are not guaranteed. They're not teenagers with a 90% chance of a breakup. They're already adults. They work together. There's no longer any reason to hesitate or shut each other out. And we get all that development in a single 12-episode season with none of the forced drama or teeny bopper bullshit that's in any of these other shows. This might only be my 6th favorite anime romance, but it's definitely number 1 on my list of anime romances worth respecting.
You weren't breathing, so I gave you CPR. Don't be dumb.
This one kinda hurts because the manga went on indefinite hiatus right as the series was hitting its climax. Kaname and Shuka are a dark horse pairing that you wouldn't think about much if not for the fact that Darwin's game is way better than it had any right to be. Kaname is a survivor. He gains the ability to craft any item he's familiar with and uses that to Batman his way out of any emergency. Shuka is a natural born killer, a flower that was finally able to bloom on the bloody battlefield. Shuka's parents were killed by a D-game player. She signed up for D-game to get her revenge, and once she had her revenge, she lost her will to live. She kept throwing herself at strong opponents, waiting for the one who would give her a glorious death so that she could reunite with her parents with her head held high. But during her battle with Kaname, she sees his powerful will to live, and it sorta infects her. She falls in love and becomes even stronger than ever. Shuka's entire design invokes this message that she is a rose with thorns. Her dress is made to look like a red rose, she's gorgeous in a graceful and noble sort of way, she is ruthless, she has a huge heart, she is ruthless because she has a huge heart, and her ability to manipulate strings and chains is an extension of her desire to protect her loved ones and punish anyone who causes them harm. Kaname and the other Sunset Ravens gave her a reason to keep living, keep fighting, keep getting stronger, and they filled that hole in her heart as she gives 110% of herself to making sure their lives are full too. This could have easily turned into a one-sided relationship, but Kaname just happens to be a good guy with a strong sense of justice that rivals Shuka's. They become a perfect pair, relying on each other and having complete, absolute faith in each other. One Piece isn't anywhere on this list because there's not any canon couples amongst the crew. I love the Straw Hats for that. They don't need romantic entanglements to be one of the most loyal crews out there. But if the story were to have gone in that direction, Kaname and Shuka are how I imagine they would be.
Will you marry me?
It only makes sense that the canon couple of my favorite rom-com series would make it pretty high on the list. Futaro Uesugi and Yotsuba Nakano from Quintessential Quintuplets are a prime example of how the best characters might not make for the best love interest. All 5 quintuplets are great. It makes sense that Futaro would eventually fall for all of them. I have a whole 14-part series analyzing all the plot lines and character arcs. Ichika is a great big sister. Nino's earnestness was an absolute game changer for the genre. Miku is the perfect dream girl for the average weeb, and Itsuki was pretty much designed from the ground up to appeal to me specifically. But I'm not the main character of Quintessential Quintuplets, and neither are you. The main character is Futaro Uesugi, an asshole who starts off the series thinking that romance is a waste of time. He has to be dragged into anything fun. He was willing to throw everything else away if it meant getting good grades and landing a good job to support his family. The one who changed him, the one who convinced him to make pleasant memories, the only person in the whole series to make him laugh is Yotsuba. And Futaro was the only one in the world who could convince her that she's not a burden and that she can be someone who can pull her sisters forward. And what cements this as a top 5 romance, and what makes this my favorite romance series of all time, is how aware it is of what it's saying. Time spent with one person is time you can't spend elsewhere. You have to make a choice. A real man dedicates himself to just one woman, and that's the kind of man Futaro is. Every time I see a series where the main character can't commit or spreads himself thin across a menagerie of love interests, I'm always reminded of why Futaro is the GOAT of romance protagonists.
You sure about that?
I lied. I love you a lot.
Rascal, more like whack yo. I guess the lesson here is that all you need to earn a free pass from your girlfriend is to have a confession so over the top it materializes her back to existence. And they say women have unrealistic standards. Mai is extremely patient and understanding with Sakuda, but she does get her licks in. She relentlessly teases and scolds him, which is what he likes about her. There are a couple of knucklehead kids forced to grow up because their internalized anxiety manifested as supernatural fuckeries, and I have an increasingly big soft spot for shows that cut through the bullshit. Plus, I've always had a soft spot for anything that shows the lead up to a relationship and everything that comes after. I praised Horimiya in 365 Days to the Wedding for hitting that initial confession in episodes 4 and 7 respectively, and I praised the ending of Quintessential Quintuplets for doing the same. Rascal Does Not Dream gets that in by the end of episode 3. Even though there are a few distractions, they just further highlight why a gorgeous celebrity like Mai would go for a scruffy rascal like Sakuda. There's this fine line between lavishing a girl with praise and being a simp. Sakuda plays that line well, which is surprising considering that Mai is basically a dream girl and he's never had a girlfriend before her. That might actually be my only issue with this relationship. There's a trope called the manic pixie dream girl. It's a trope I don't have any personal issues with, but it does often relegate the girl into being an emotional support tool for the male lead while gaining nothing in return. I don't think that's quite the case here. In fact, if any character in Rascal is a manic pixie dream girl, it'd be Shoko. But within the span of the anime season, Mai spends a lot more time playing emotional support, but at the same time, Sakuda is the one who keeps getting roped into these bizarre situations. Maybe Mai gets more focus in the movies, which I haven't seen yet because the studio refuses to make them accessible to the States. That shit is just so freaking annoying. It almost ruins the series for me, honestly.
That sounds good. You too, blue.
A key component in any relationship is communication. It's one of the most difficult parts of any relationship. It's a leading cause in breakups, and so it's only natural that stories about relationships use communication breakdowns to instigate drama. But there is something inherently fantastical about fiction. Fiction exists because we make stuff up. If we're making stuff up, why not go all the way and reflect an ideal world rather than the one we are all forced to live in? Which is why it's so weird that there are so few romances, anime or otherwise, that make strong communication a key factor in why the romance works out. That's why my number 2 pick is Masachika Kuze and Alia Kujo from Roshidere, Alia Sometimes Hides Her Feelings in Russian. My feelings towards this series are informed by the light novel, so to keep spoilers to a minimum, I'll just say this. Both Masachika and Alia are absolutely in love with each other and have been since the moment they decided to work together. The only thing standing in their way is their own self-loathing and the fact that if they do start dating, it could send the wrong message to their fellow students and hurt Alia's election chances. Trust and communication are the keys to any relationship, and these two have that down way more than they realize. Alia trusts Masachika more than anyone else, even her own sister. He's always been kind and helpful to her, and his talent has provided an invaluable resource in achieving her various goals. Meanwhile, because Masachika knows Russian and Alia is honest to a fault, she's incapable of hiding things from him. He understands every word, understands that she's practically throwing herself at him, and while he's often tempted to take advantage of her, he never does. Mark my words, whenever she does find out, she's going to realize how many times he could have abused her earnestness and never did. And when that happens, she's probably just gonna fall in love with him all over again. Can you imagine? if I actually tried to put this at number 1, if I actually said with a straight face that Blake and Yang are my all-time favorite relationship. This is a completely heteronormative list because I'm a completely heteronormative guy. So can you imagine if my one and only LGBT rep on this list was from fucking Ruby of all things? Could you imagine if I tried to actually defend that? Oh, I really want to just see that timeline where I do try to like just commit to the bit. I really just, one of these days, I'm just gonna commit to the bit on putting Ruby at the top of one of these lists. And y'all ain't gonna even know when to expect it. Because it will be like a spur of the moment thing. It'll be one of those situations where I have like 19 really solid entries and just need one more. And so I decide to make the number 1 spot a fucking joke and then just commit to the bit the whole time. I could do that for years if I had the proper motivation. Just saying. Before I get to my actual number 1 pick, something pretty much all of these have in common is that the romance plot is focused on the two people getting together. The handful that don't put focus on the romance relegate it to a subplot in a genre that isn't all that concerned with romantic entanglements. There's precious few anime that put the majority of its focus on one single relationship and the hijinks that can ensue when two people are happily dating. The ones that tease at that rank higher than they otherwise would, and none of them go quite as far as my number 1 pick.
I swear, I'm always gonna protect you, no matter what!
Shikimori is not just a cutie, isn't that great of a series, but the relationship between Yu Izumi and Miyako Shikimori is the single greatest relationship I have seen put to screen. Never once in the entire run of the manga is their love called into question. The only real sign of jealousy comes from Shikimori projecting her own sibling rivalry onto Izumi's best friend Inuzuka. The whole premise of the show is an inversion of the classic Prince Charming trope. Izumi is the damsel in distress, always getting hurt by his supernaturally bad luck. Meanwhile, Shikimori is his Prince Charming, always dashing in to save the day with her superpowers, I guess. What keeps it interesting is that Izumi is actually a socially well-adjusted boy who makes friends everywhere he goes and always tries his best to help others. Meanwhile, Shikimori is an absolute social train wreck who owes her popularity to good looks and athletics. And that leads into what makes this couple so special. The cutesy popular girl act is just an act. Shikimori became obsessed with shoujo romances at the same time she was hitting puberty, and only put on the act hoping that a handsome boy would come and sweep her off her feet. That's why she flips out every time Izumi sees her tough tomboy side. Her innate chivalrous nature betrays her desire to transform into a girly girl, but that same chivalry is what gets Izumi to fall for her. There's a lot to learn about romances, both fictional and real, by studying the lessons and dynamics of what came before. So what are your favorite anime romances? Let me know in the comments below. I'm Mediocrity4. Happy Valentine's Day.